Hello, hello, and welcome to episode 7 of the Dateable AF podcast. Today, we are talking about avoiding the situationship spiral when it's time to define things. We've all been there, texting all day, seeing each other regularly, but still somehow unsure if you're even dating.
Well, so what even is a situationship? Um, and before you answer that, I would like to say this. I just came off a plane from San Diego where the weather was really nice, and there was a flight attendant, and I hope she's listening, that was on my flight coming home, and I would like to have a situationship with her.
Should we get her name and what airline she was on so someone can send this out to her?
I'm willing to take any three of these major topic areas of a situationship.
All right, well, let's talk about it. So let's set you up for success with this situationship with the flight attendant. And let's talk about what a situationship is. I know some of our older listeners, like our age, might not be familiar with this term. So tell us what it is, Rachel.
Well, so it can be a lot of things. It certainly can be a romantic sexual connection, emotional intimacy, but really no clear commitment. And I'm going to go through a couple of these, and I will just say that I've had all of them. Again, these are Monique and Veronica's across these bullet points.
That shall remain unnamed. Their real name shall remain anonymous.
Absolutely. Uh, Sometimes they often start casual and then get emotionally sticky.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then sometimes fun and sometimes confusing. That one jumps out at me because when you're starting something with somebody, and it can be a lot of fun if you're having a connection. And then there is a possible moment where the other person's moving forward and really seeing it move forward at a different pace than you, and you're wanting to just kind of keep it fun, and they're going deeper into it. And so I think that's a situationship because you may still want it and you may still want to have fun, but you're really not ready to go where they're going.
That makes sense. So what you're saying is one person wants things to be more emotionally involved and the other person wants to be more casual. So you are kind of dating, but it's not exactly a relationship.
True. And I do think that's why people hesitate to talk about it, because if one person's really wanting to continue to keep it where it is and have some fun and not get too serious, at the moment that the other person that wants to be serious brings it up, they know they run the risk of everybody having to make a decision.
Yep, I do think that this is one of the reasons why people avoid the DTR, the defining the relationship conversation. Because if I try to make you define it, then what if you just bail and don't want it at all? So I'd rather sort of hang on to this little shard of whatever I have than to have you cut it off altogether.
Yes, and this leads to, I will say, in my dating experiences, I have had these situationships, though I've not struggled to talk to people about where we are in them. And I feel like that's very important, is that whether you're in the same place or not, you have to own it, and you need to be able to talk to people about what you want versus what they want and see
Maybe
if you're on
you're
the
the
same path.
person who's good talking about it, but the person you're in the situationship with isn't that good talking about it because they don't want to end up cutting it off.
Yes, and so here's a red flag, is
Okay.
that is if that's the case, then I think you need to pay attention, because think about this. If you can't talk about the things that you're scared of, and you can't talk, that's pretty surfacey level beginning stuff. That yes, you may have to have a hard conversation and you may not get what you want out of it, but you cannot carry that in. Can you imagine trying to have like a serious, deep relationship with somebody where you can't even talk about that? How would they
Yeah.
possibly talk about the stuff that's hard?
Right. Yeah, and I will say that I have in my dating days, which as you all know was a long time ago, I have been in a couple of situationships in which I was the person who wanted to keep it casual and the other person wanted more. And so that was tricky. And it was tricky to keep saying, this is casual, I want to date other people, and have the other person pressing for a commitment.
It is, and I do think the reality is that the other person oftentimes will continue to say yes to something that they're not really happy in. I mean, it doesn't feel really comfortable to them, but they want it so badly that they're willing to say yes to that for a while. And
Mhm.
that I think I'm curious what you have to say about this as a therapist is who owns that mostly? If you're the person, like you said, where you wanted to keep it casual and you're saying it out loud, yet you know that that's actually not where they're placing it. Um,
Yeah, it's a great question.
who owns that side of the conversation? I mean, what happens there?
I'm going to make an analogy for you. If you and I go on a run, you run at a much faster pace than I do. Who's going to set the pace for the run?
Mm, well, not me.
Yeah.
If I want you to run with me,
Yep.
then I can't.
I can't run any faster, but you can run slower. And so I would say that that's a good metaphor for this relationship thing, that the person who wants to go faster does not get to set the pace. That the pace has to be set by the slower person, because forcing that is just not going to be good. And to further the metaphor, the faster person may decide that this is not their best running partner. They need somebody who runs a little faster pace. So
That's a great
that,
metaphor. I like it.
thank you. I just came up with it on the fly.
Excellent. No one would have ever known if you had
Just pulled
children.
it right out of my ass.
It's like every good therapist does.
Exactly. So to answer your question about who owns the conversation, I think both people have to be willing to talk about it, but the person who doesn't want to rush forward owns the pacing of it. And the other person has to accept it or move on to someone else.
Yes, and at the end of the day, you can't make something happen that is not meant to happen. And that's the other thing of just instead of worrying about saying something and then losing something, is that if you're really not meant to have it, if they're not going to come with you, you're going to lose it anyway.
Hmm.
And to me, sometimes it's just better to rip that band-aid off.
Yeah. I think some people think, though, I might lose it anyway. I just don't want to lose it today. So I'm not going to have the conversation today. And this is what gets people in trouble, because then a year later, you're still in the situationship and it hasn't gone anywhere.
Yeah, and that's a lot of time suck.
Yep.
You have to decide whether or not you're willing to give up that much time. And also, this is something that I've had several conversations with some of my single friends. Is that time? They're anywhere from 45 to 75, we'll say, and if they're ready to settle down, then they're thinking about each dating opportunity or situationship as trying to move it, the possibility of moving it towards something that is permanent. And
Hmm.
if that's what you're doing, then tick tock, because if you stay in a situationship where it's really in an say a gray zone that you're not comfortable with, and then you waste a year just because you're not ready,
Hmm.
then now you're back at it again.
Yeah. Starting all over with someone else at ground zero.
E
Absolutely.
exactly. And so if you know that about yourself, I mean, I have a good friend right now, and she is dating, and she knows, her desire is to partner with somebody. And if you know that that's what your desire is, then you have to own that. You gotta factor all this in, and staying in situationships over and over and over again that can linger, that's burning up a lot of your time that you can't get back.
Yep. That's so true. I know enough about your dating history to know that you have been in some situationship where the other person would have liked it to move forward and you were just wanting to keep it casual. Have you ever been on the other side of it where you really wanted to be with someone and they were putting you off?
I first I would like to say to the audience that I promise I don't share all my dating secrets with Dr. Kyle.
Well, this is over many decades that I have known these things, so this is not recent history.
Yeah. uh, I have to say that I haven't been in a situationship where I have been in a situationship, but it couldn't move forward, but not because we didn't want it to, but because it couldn't for other reasons. So we'll
Okay,
just say
all
that.
right, that makes sense.
Uh,
I was really asking more about the dynamic of you sort of being the one longing for someone, and that person was like, "Nope, just keeping it casual."
uh, yeah, no, I haven't been in that situation.
Yeah, me either. I think maybe that's like some kind of attachment style that we share.
Oh, it's just airing our dirty laundry
Airing our dirty laundry.
right
Yeah.
out here for
It's like,
everybody.
I don't want to need you too much. I don't want you to need me too much, and we're all good.
That might be us.
That could be. So anyway, I just was wondering what that would feel like if you were the one sort of, pursuing someone and having them, putting you off. So let's talk about, how do you know, or how does one know if what they're in is a situationship?
Yeah, it's a good question. I again, I wrestle with it because I'm very direct, just naturally in my communication style. So I haven't spent a lot of time not trying to be clear about where I am with someone. And but I also know a lot of people do not communicate like that. And then that I think the whole idea of, like, say you introduce somebody, do you introduce them as somebody you're dating, or do you introduce them as this is my girlfriend,
Mhm.
or or know, or
Or this
remember
is Veronica.
re, no, remember our dear friend, whose name will not be mentioned, but she's long since passed, and she was a jewel to our community in Austin. But this is my lover.
Oh, my lover.
My lover.
Exactly. Oh, y'all, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say, don't use the word lover. Come on. Then we're
She was.
automatically picturing you two in bed together. No. Uh-uh.
I love God rest her
No.
soul.
Mm-mm. Don't say lover. You can say a lot of things.
um, yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting to think about, because I've certainly been dating, and I don't really define them necessarily when I'm introducing them to someone.
Right. You don't say, this is my girlfriend, Veronica, or Monique. You say, this is Monique. You don't
Right.
have to define who it is. But I think after a certain time, you do start to do that. Oh, hey, this is my girlfriend, or hey, this is my partner, or you probably wouldn't say, this is the person I'm dating. That's kind of weird.
It is kind of weird. And I do wonder if people take offense to that. I mean, I have had people say, I'll introduce somebody, and they'll be with me at a party, and then I'll have somebody say, "Oh, are y'all dating?"
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
I just
I'm like,
introduced them by
well,
their name.
we're in a situationship.
We're in a situation.
But I think one of the defining characteristics of a situationship is that you kind of act like a couple. You're seeing each other regularly, but you don't really use the word dating.
Yeah. And again, that's the conversation, because I have also been in dating someone where we've been clear that we're not dating exclusively.
Yeah. And so do you
And
think if you say dating, does that connote that you're dating exclusively?
I kind of wonder if dating means that you're actually dating that person, but that at the moment that you say, this is my girlfriend,
Right. I
then
think then it's something else.
that moves it to, and I would be curious. I would love feedback from our audience about this because that's just my opinion about it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yep. And I think also this is generational because I can remember, we would say we were going with somebody when I was a kid, and my parents would be like, going with, what does that
Were
mean? And
you?
I feel like now I've become that old lady who's like, what does that mean? But, thinking about some of our beta testers in our Get Dateable groups, they would talk about, we're not dating, we're just hanging out, or we're just
Yeah.
hooking up. So hooking up obviously connotes something sexual. Hanging out, I don't know, maybe you're Netflix and chilling. I don't know. I don't know what that means exactly, but something like that. But dating, I think, means something more serious, I guess.
That would be that sounds right to me. And then there's this whole idea of is this person someone that you would invite to a family function?
Mhm.
Somebody that you feel comfortable introducing to your family? Do they invite you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
good questions. This, I have my younger kiddo is married, and he did not introduce us to his now wife until they had been dating for about 6 months, because he wanted to make sure he knew that she was somebody really important to him. Granted, we were also living in another country at the time, so it wasn't like, he lived down the street from us or something, but we would come into town pretty regularly, and he would say, no, I'm not ready for her to meet my family yet, because in his mind, that indicated something to her, like, oh, this has gotten to a serious level because you're meeting my family now. And it also, he didn't want us to start getting attached to her if she wasn't somebody that was going to be around. So I think, he wouldn't have brought her to a family function until he was sure. So I think some people are more protective about that.
That I also think that takes conversation. I wouldn't I wouldn't necessarily I w- don't necessarily keep people back from, say, meeting my parents because we're just dating. I don't
Mhm.
really think about it that way. Uh, because I also know my parents probably they're older, they're not gonna get invested in anybody anyway.
Exactly. At this point in time, they're like, nah.
They're not and and then I also have to be sure that I tell everybody that goes in my house that there's a certain photo on the family wall that will stay there forever. I hope it's not offensive that
Might this be a photo of you and someone else?
it's my ex that they seem to still want to keep on the family wall.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, nice. Uh, but I don't think about it that way. I think a lot of people do. And that again is a conversation is I do wonder if there's someone I dated for a little while. I did not ever take them to visit my folks who don't live that far away. It was never meant anything to me about where we were in the relationship, but they may have thought that.
Hmm. Well, that person didn't stick around, so maybe it was more of a situationship.
Well, it was a situationship. Yes.
There you go. So yes, but to your point, like bringing someone to a wedding as your plus one, or bringing someone to home to your family, I think might give them some indication that the relationship was more serious. And if the person you're seeing is not doing that, maybe it is more of a situationship.
Again, this also relates to owning conversation. I didn't need to have that conversation because it didn't represent something that I was needing to deal with or understand in the relationship. But if the other person needs that, like if you're on the other side of that and you're beginning to have feelings about that and you want to know where you stand in the situationship, then you have to take responsibility for asking.
Yes, for sure. And I think that when you start to have feelings, but you're afraid to talk about them, that's a really important sign to pay attention to. I think that could potentially be a red flag, because why would you be afraid to tell someone you had feelings for them?
Right. I big a big sign that if you're withholding things that you feel like are important for you to bring forward in the relationship in the moment, you need to really think about that. And I know we've talked about pacing. So, if you're dated someone 3 times, you don't want to love bomb them. That's not okay. Even if you're having those feelings, then you need to go sit on Dr. Kyle's
Talk
couch.
to your therapist. That's
Talk
right.
to your therapist about that. That's a different thing. But as you go along, the pacing of it is important for you to communicate how you feel, not not because you're expecting something from them, but because you need to say what it is you need to say.
Yeah. And if it scares them off, it's better to know that now. Like you said before, you don't want to get a year down the road and then tell someone you're invested and have them be like, oh, but this was just casual for me.
Yes. And I have had several dates where people were hesitant to ask me questions
Yeah.
because they didn't want the answers, or they just weren't good at it. Sometimes was unclear.
Hard to say. Yeah. But I
Right.
think going back to what we were talking about earlier, these might have been people who were more invested in you and they knew if they pressed it, they were going to get an answer that they didn't want to hear.
Maybe.
Maybe. If you are constantly over analyzing communication and texts with someone when you've been seeing them a while, I think that's a sign that it could be a situationship. Because when you're securely relating to someone, you shouldn't be constantly over analyzing what they're saying or how often they're texting you or how often you're seeing each other. So if that's happening to you, it's good to evaluate whether you might be in a situationship.
Yeah. Yes. I think that all of that is just, if the pacing, if it feels like you're in a tug of war and you're always uncomfortable because you don't know if you need to put the next foot forward, and then can you take this step, and all of that, you have to really look at it and go, is this right? Am I
Mhm.
moving forward in something that is meant to be, because, or at least that we're pacing together? And that goes also to this, back to this cagey thing we talked a little bit
Mhm.
about, is if you're on the other side of this and you actually are enjoying the person, but you feel some need to withhold from them, because you need some upper hand in the situation,
Yeah,
that's not healthy.
not a good sign. Not a good sign. So, what do you think keeps people stuck in the situationship spiral?
Well, I do think it's people just being desperate
Mhm.
to be with somebody, and
Yep.
that goes back to, I think, in the very first segment when we were talking about just spending time alone so that you're really good at being alone. It really, that's one of the big benefits, is if you learn how to spend time by yourself, then when you enter, I think you're a whole lot less likely to get into situationships that you don't know how to get out of, or you don't stay in situationships just
It's
because you just want to be in something.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think a lot of times it's that people, they don't really want to ruin the vibe that, hey, I'm enjoying hanging out with you, but I don't really want to ask where it's going because I'm afraid it's going to harsh the vibe. And,
Yeah.
even if it's already stressing you out, you don't want to tank it by pressing, and asking where things are going.
Yeah. And that chill vibe, that trying to act like that you don't, it's okay if we don't talk for, 3 days, and that's fine. And if that really is fine with you, then own it. If it's not fine with you, then say something.
Yeah. And this is something that I see a lot in my practice that people will be. I was talking with a client this week who's been seeing someone for, I think it's been over a year now, and they're still kind of back and forth about, well, I don't know if we're going to see each other this weekend. One of them is, you know, nervous about whether they're going to have plans this weekend or not. And it's like, wow, that's a long time to be still worried about this. That after a year, you should be talking about it on Wednesday. Like, hey, what are we doing this weekend? Or are we doing something this weekend? And there could be other reasons why you're not making plans. Maybe the other person just assumes the plans are going to happen. But if you're still anxious about it after some time, it's not as chill as you'd like it to be, obviously.
Yeah, that that is that is true. And I also like this idea of mistaking consistency for commitment. That
Mm-hmm.
they're showing up, but are they really showing up? And that's a big one because I don't if s- I notice a lot more about the quality of the time that I'm interacting with somebody than the quantity of time that I'm interacting with somebody.
That's such a good point. Yeah, because just because someone's coming over to your house after work on Wednesday doesn't mean that there's some commitment there. It's like, yeah, they're consistently coming over once or twice a week, but they're not moving things forward in a way that's meaningful.
Yeah. Um, I also think that the just some experiences I've had is that if you I don't know, I get a feeling about just sort of it's time for me to connect with somebody. And this happens in my friendships as well. Is that if I'm really enjoying you, there's sort of this internal thing that goes off for me that is it's time for me to connect. It's
Hmm.
I feel like either because I'm missing you and I want to connect, or because I feel like I want to know what's going on with you. I feel like I want to know how your week's going. And I really want to know that. It's not a rote thing. It's not, oh, I should just say, hey, how's your week going? Because I really want to hear like what's going on.
Yeah. So you're not looking at your calendar and saying, wow, it's been 2 days since I've talked to this person. It's more like, oh man, I'd really like to know how she's doing.
Yeah. And I think that's something really important to think about for yourself, whether you're in a situationship, when you're dating, is just really the reasons why you want to connect with somebody and when you're connecting, how you're doing it. And that it is you're invested in it in a way that is quality and that you're not counting the number of times you're texting every day.
Yes, that's true. Because I think that there's also this idea of we pay attention selectively to the things that we want to pay attention to. So the things that support what we want to believe. And I think that sometimes that leaves people clinging to little crumbs. So, well, this person did call me or they did send me a text. So we cling to that because we want to believe that the person's invested. And I don't necessarily think that that's a good thing. I think you have to look at patterns, and someone throwing you a bone here and there may not be what you want. If you want to move forward and have a real relationship, don't count the crumbs as something that actually meets your needs because I don't think it does.
And that goes to very much to what we were talking about in the dating and sort of bad behavior around dating is that if someone is throwing you these little morsels, it is likely that maybe they're also throwing somebody else some morsels and they're just
Mhm.
trying to decide who it is they really are most interested in. And I just think you need to ask straight up, hey, are you are we seeing is this something like we're actually dating, which is cool, dating other people, but if they really are just what's the term, breadcrumbing you or
Mhm.
whatever it's called, and it doesn't feel good, doesn't I think you can date multiple people and not do that to somebody.
I think so too. You can actually be direct and honest. As we said before, I think people stay stuck in that situationship spiral because they're afraid of asking for what they want because they're scared if they ask or if they speak up directly about it, the other person's just going to disappear.
Yeah. And for myself, I will say this, and I would, if all of my Veronicas and Moniques got together, they might agree about this. I don't recommend it. I really don't. I'm not encouraging that behavior, but is, is that they might say, hey, this person isn't wanting a relationship. And I would say back to that, that's not necessarily true, although I don't need a relationship. And that's the other piece that is important is that I engage with people in the dating. I'm open if the connection is really there and we are pacing nicely and all of that makes sense and there is an opening in my life for that. But I do think you need to be clear about that for yourself is if you're dating and you're not really wanting to, you don't want to be in a long-term relationship, you need to own it.
Yep.
And then the other pieces, which I try to do, is yes, I mean, I'm actually not looking for that, but I'm open to it if it comes my way.
Yep. I think that's a great place to be because you're not desperate for something, but you're open to it if it comes along. So, if you find yourself in a situationship, how do you define that? Like, when do you have that DTR, define the relationship talk? And how do you do all that without actually losing your mind?
Well, I think at first, for me, I just want to get to know somebody. And I think the best thing to do is not worry a lot about what's down the road because you will naturally make your way down the road if both of you are healthy and you're traveling down the road. I find that what works, what I'm interested in, honestly, and it's not even about working, it's just what I need, is just getting to know somebody and being really curious and interested in them and hoping that I get that back. And if I do, then it's likely that we will travel down that road a bit together. And then we may hit a point where some stuff comes up that doesn't work for either of us. And I address it once I see it. I mean, I will say it. And we talk a little bit in here about how I mean, that can be hurtful, especially if you travel, say, 6 months down the road with somebody.
Yeah.
Um, which that has happened for me. 6 months down the road with somebody that I care very deeply about, that we there was a very strong mutual caring,
Hmm.
and we didn't stop caring about one another. And so along the way, though, we had to keep talking about where we were. And that person actually really wanted to live in a way that I wasn't comfortable living, probably in an environment that I really didn't want to be in or wasn't my yearning, but was hers. And I also wanted to go in a different direction. And so as we were bumping up against those bigger topics, then I just brought it forward and said, "Hey, I just I and it is one of those things like we cared for one another, so there was not we had to buck up and recognize that we couldn't continue to travel down that road together."
That makes sense. So, if you were advising someone who might wonder if they're in a situationship or someone who's newly dating someone, when do you think is the best time to bring this topic up to start talking about defining the relationship?
I think at the point that you begin to talk more deeply about your vision of a future, when you
Yeah.
begin to explore how you like to live and how you see yourself living.
Yeah, I think that's great. Like, I think you have to wait long enough so that you have context. You know, kind of what
Mm.
this relationship is and what you want from it. But so I think you don't want to wait too long because you want to bring it up early enough so that you stay empowered, that you don't get left footed and, you know, you're invested, but you're not sure where the other person is. Because then I think you end up feeling disempowered and that's no good.
Yes, and I don't it's an art form, and I don't think there's I think you have to feel your way through that, and it can be tough. And there is no doubt that if you're in an imbalance in where you are on that continuum, if you're in a different space, then somebody's feelings are gonna get a little hurt, and that's not the end of the world because if you continue on without addressing what's before you, then somebody's going to get really hurt, and likely two people are going to get deeply damaged by dragging something along when you hit that point where you know you should be having that conversation,
And you're just
and
avoiding it.
you're avoiding it because you're just scared of the outcome.
Yeah. So the thing that I would suggest from a therapist perspective is that you check in with yourself first when you're seeing someone. Like, how is this feeling to me? What is it that I actually want with this person? Am I open to this being casual, or am I looking for something that's more committed? So you got to get clear about that for yourself first.
Yep. And this goes back. I think everything we talk about in dating, there are a couple of key components. One is knowing yourself. You're going to be better at dating if you know yourself. And if you're good at communicating, you're going to be better at dating. You're just going to do a better job of it. And, I will say that I've managed to hang on to everybody that I've gone out with, except for one person, I've managed to keep as a good friend
Yeah.
because
Which that
because
speaks well for you because you're a good communicator.
and I have my lesbian card. Is that's what we do?
That's right. That's a future episode that we're going to be talking about staying friends with your ex.
Yes.
So that'll be a topic for another day. But let's talk about, so if you're in this situationship and you want to define it, I want to offer you some things that you could actually say to the person that don't sound awkward, because sometimes having the words is important. So saying something like, "Hey, I'm really enjoying this. I'd like to get clear about what it is." And just toss that ball into the other person's court and see what they say. Another thing you could say is, "I want to make sure we're on the same page about this. Like, what are we building here? Let's make sure we're in the same place about that."
Yeah, I think those are excellent ways to lead into the conversation. And, I don't, so those are great ways to open it. And then sometimes when you're in it, it's tough.
Yeah, for sure. And if you don't get the answer that you want, I really want you to think about redefining that. What you feel as rejection is actually just getting clarity. It's not changing the relationship, it's just giving you more information about what that relationship was all along. So if the person says, "Hey, I'm not really looking to move this forward," or "I don't want anything serious," just think of that as dodging something that wasn't going to be good for you in the first place. So try not to frame it as rejection, but like, "Oh, now I have all the information that I need."
I think when somebody gives you that kind of honesty, you should see it as a gift.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And yeah,
So if you're in a situationship and you decide to walk away because it's not what you want, and that could be because you're the person who wants more, or it could be because you're the person who wants less and you see that it's destructive to the person you're seeing. So how do you detach from that person?
I think this one is really interesting in that I think in the moment when we're trying to detach, there is, and especially if one person is not really wanting to detach, that there's a tendency to look at the negative things about what was going on and then trying to somehow make yourself feel better by picking at it or picking at them. And I think you have to be very careful about that because just because the someone did not want to move forward in the way that you want them to, they're being honest with you about the situationship, that it doesn't mean that there's a bad thing to focus on. It just means that you've hit a point where you can't, one of you doesn't see your way forward in it.
Yeah,
And
you're going different directions.
yeah, and I've had that experience where the hurt caused the picking,
Mhm.
and that I got it, but the feelings being hurt then caused them to want to pick at whatever they're thinking they were seeing or not seeing there. And honestly, that happens to be the only relationship I
I
haven't
was going to say, is
managed.
that the only one that you're not friends with?
Yeah, Monique.
Monique,
Uh,
of course.
right. And I
Yep.
don't know. Time may take care of that. We'll see how that
Yeah.
rolls around. But that is a personal experience I've had, and I've seen it happen. So
Mhm.
just beware.
And what I'm hearing there is that when you detach from someone, regardless of which side of the equation you're on, you want to have compassion for that person and you want to have compassion for yourself. So don't lose sight of being kind and compassionate, even if you're having to deliver some difficult information.
Yep. And I also think that, again, the gift of honesty, even if it stings at first, is important. And then also, like you said, choosing yourself.
Mhm.
And so not taking somebody's scraps and just choosing yourself and then moving on.
Yep, I wholeheartedly agree. When you choose yourself, you're really choosing peace. Because when you're in that stage of maybe, like maybe this is going to happen, but in your heart, you know that it's not, I think that you're going to end up feeling better once you decide to walk away because what you're choosing is peace and choosing yourself.
I agree 100%.
All right. Well, let's talk about some of the key points that we've discussed here in our situationship episode. I think the first one that I would like to point out is that it's okay to be in a situationship. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as both people agree that that's what it is, you could carry on a long time with that and have it be perfectly satisfying for both people.
And I think we can both agree that you don't ever, no matter how far along you are in your relationship, call the other person your lover.
Very important point. We don't say lover.
And don't be afraid to ask for clarification about the relationship. Yeah, don't be scared of that. Just ask.
Yeah, it's better to have the information than not have it. If you're staying in something that's unfulfilling, I really want you to ask yourself why. Like, do you really want to hang on to this person, or is it that you're scared of defining it because you don't want to lose them?
And sort of the last nugget of this is you don't have to be mad at somebody to walk away. You
Mhm.
don't have to have negative feelings to walk away. Just look at it as being kind and being honest and just take the best of it and walk away.
Yeah, it's okay to do that and take care of yourself and be kind and compassionate to the other person. Well, friends, this is where we wrap up the episode. We want to really encourage you to send us your stories. We've gotten some great DMs from you, and we would love for those to keep coming. You can send those to us on Instagram. We are at Get Dateable. You can also send messages to our email address, which is info@getdateable.com. We are a standalone pod these days, and we would really,
Woo!
really love for you to like and follow us. We want you to be able to catch these every single week. We want you to share it with your friends. Next week, we are talking about being friends with your ex. Is she just a friend? So we can't wait to share some info with you guys. We thank you so much for listening to the Dateable AF podcast, where we help you find your happy ending.
And remember, be bold, be kind, and for the love of queer dating, don't text your ex. Stay dateable.
AF.